Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to a new episode of What a Relief, Islamic Relief's official podcast. My name is Cecilia Borno, and I am your host. I am very delighted to be interviewing today Dua Randhawa, who is the Orphans Support Programs Manager. And she's going to be speaking to us today all about our orphan program and how we run it here at Islamic Relief right after this. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in today. You are watching What a Relief, Islamic Relief's official podcast, and with me today is Dua, who is going to be talking to us all about our Orphans program. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm really delighted to be speaking to you because I know our Orphans program is probably the most popular program that we have at Islamic Relief. When people think about Islamic Relief, they automatically associate it with that Orphans program. And because you are the manager of this program, I thought, wouldn't it be great to have you come? And I know that you took a recent trip. So I want to talk all details about that today. Let's start off with introduce yourself. Who are you and what brings you here today?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you. My name is Dua, obviously. I'm the program manager for our orphan support programs. I started here at Islamic Relief just about a year ago. We're coming up on a year now.
Wow.
It's funny, I'll tell you the story about that, but I applied last year at Qurbani season, and we're in Qurbani season now.
So what inspired you to dedicate your life to helping with an orphans program?
Okay, so just a little bit of background with the work that I've done. I've been sort of in the development sector for a while now. Originally, when I started in my undergrad, my specialty was like sociology, writing, and then I studied abroad at Oxford for 1 year, which is when I learned about development, international development particularly, and they had a really good refugee studies program there. So I got first into like refugee migration studies, and then I did my master's specifically, again, in like international development with a focus on refugee and migration studies. And my interest in that was particularly when I was looking at policy around asylum approaches. So the way that different countries do it, particularly how Muslim countries do it. So Turkey, for example, took in more refugees than any other country around the world.
Right.
And they didn't have a legal asylum approach. It was all based in this concept of karam. So basically just like this Islamic duty of like you have to your brother that you have to host them. But then again, if you don't have a legal approach, then it has certain ramifications for refugees. So just like studying things like that. And my interest in it specifically was because there's no sort of like consolidated way that refugees can advocate for themselves and say, this is what we want, or these are the challenges that we're dealing with. Like everybody's speaking on behalf of them, but they're not really speaking for themselves. So once I graduated with that research, I ended up actually working at a genocide prevention organization for a few years. Left there because they didn't speak on the Palestine issue. So I did a whole like call to action, told them I didn't think the organization's values aligned with the way that they were responding or not responding to the situation. My values didn't align with the work that I was doing anymore. And they said, well, nobody should stay in a place where their values don't align.
Right.
So I left. And at that time, I was just making a lot of dua about like where Allah wanted me to go, what kind of work He wanted me to do. And I really didn't have a goalpost. I was kind of just like, the duas I were making were like, I want to serve Allah however He wants to be served. Yeah. And wherever that takes me, I'm willing to go. And like in that time, I was just applying everywhere, as you can imagine. A lot of development organizations. I ended up actually getting an offer at USAID. My grandfather worked at USAID, so there's like the legacy there as well.
Wow.
I also last year at ICNA, so just May of last year, I went to like every Islamic organization's booth and got a brochure. And I had no idea what the scope was of like the way that Islamic organizations work. And then it was literally during Qurbani, where I was like headed home to New York for Eid, and I still hadn't paid my Qurbani, and I was like, oh shoot, let me do this. And I usually give all my donations to Islamic Relief. But for some reason, I hadn't even thought about looking at the careers page.
Oh, wow.
So I saw the Orphan Support Program manager position. I was like, perfect, applied to it. And now here we are.
Nasib, subhanallah.
It's a very funny story, but here I am again, like just in a position where I get to help now the most vulnerable population in the world.
100%, yeah.
Refugees are up there, but like children and orphan children are really just some of the most vulnerable people in the world and so quickly growing. Like there's about 6,000 new orphans every single day.
Oh my God, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Our Orphans program at Islamic Relief USA, tell us about it. How does it run? What do we do?
Right. So it's first of all, like you said, it's our flagship program. So for the past 20, 30 years, this organization has been doing orphan sponsorship. And orphan sponsorship particularly is linking a donor with an orphan.
Right.
So whether a donor has one orphan or multiple orphans, every orphan is specifically sponsored by a donor. So it's not just a fund of money we have to just support orphans. There's that clear like linkage of money coming in and then going to the orphans.
Sorry, can I pause? Why? Why is that important? I know Islamically why, but I want the audience to understand as well.
Yeah, I think it creates connection. It creates accountability.
Yeah.
It gives donors what they're looking for as well, and like actually taking care of an orphan, which is what Islam says. You know, it's not, and then you know where your money is going. You know what's happening with it. It's directly going to this one orphan whose name you know, whose family you know about, whose circumstances you know about, and you are sponsoring, taking care of this orphan and this family as a byproduct.
That's right. So in Islam, there's a hadith of Rasulullah where the Prophet said that me and the orphan are going to be like this on the Day of Judgment. So like we're like that relationship should be like this. It's not this just generic giving for the poor or the hungry, but the actual kafala or the sponsorship of a human being and being responsible for that human being.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the accountability comes in, right? It's not just like your money is going to orphans somewhere, somehow, and you don't actually know the breakdown of what that money looks like or what's actually being done with it, but it really is that direct one-to-one. We also do have funds where we have development projects that have a lot of orphan beneficiaries. Those projects are more sort of related to livelihoods. They might be like skill building workshops, occupational help, housing, stuff like that. That's outside of just the one-to-one funds that are given to orphan families. And then we have another project that's our complementary fund. So that's something that's specific to IRUSA that we give to our country field offices to help support any orphan families that have any sort of emergency. So the goal behind it is really like medical emergencies, shelter emergencies, and educational. Originally, the thought behind it was that it would do more than sort of just giving that monthly allowance in a way. And it would really help alleviate people out of poverty. But what we've seen is that when people are in such like grave poverty, there's just so many emergencies that it's really just trying to help them out of that deficit. So a lot of it ends up being used on medical emergencies, shelter emergencies, and not really even getting into that educational component. But that's a gap that some of our development projects cover. So it's like those three big sort of components of the program.
It's like wraparound services, right? So it's not just food or it's not just shelter. It's, the whole gambit of services that would be required to live a dignified life. So how do you guys choose the orphans? What is it based on?
So that's something that we work with our field offices. So every field office have staff. The number of staff depends on the number of orphans, just so we can make sure that like every orphan is checked in on, every family is monitored, making sure they are doing well, have everything that they need. Those staff members will then go through a sort of checklist to find the most vulnerable people. So that'll depend on family size. That'll depend on whether one parent, both parents have passed away, who's involved in the child's life. It'll depend on whether or not the child is enrolled in education. So we have a whole list of criteria that the field staff will go through to find the most vulnerable people so we can prioritize those families.
So in Islam, you qualify as an orphan even if you have a living parent, one living parent.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's a part of our criteria as well. We qualify an orphan as a child who's missing one or both parents. And so a big part of our programming and our doing this work in an ethical way is to try to keep children with their families, with their extended families, or some sort of guardian, rather than the way some organizations will do it, which is institutionalized care, orphanages, and places like those just have such a high risk and tendency of malpractice. And you see instances like, parents selling their children to orphanages to get some sort of money and stuff like that. So in order to do it ethically, we try to keep the child with a family or extended family guardian.
Well, that's excellent. So you recently went to the field, and honestly, I think what inspired me to want to do this episode in particular is because we had an all-staff meeting where you described your trip, and it was just so moving that I was like, our audience deserves to hear about this. I would love for you to recount that entire experience and what it was like for you.
Yeah, sure. So we went to Iraq. It was actually my first field visit with Islamic Relief for the Orphan Program. Specifically, we went to the Kurdistan region. So Iraq is broken up into two regions. One is the Kurdistan region, one is the Arab region, where Baghdad is the capital. In the Kurdistan region, it's Erbil. So there's a lot of history about like the division between the two sides, the ethnic differences, the sanctions, like all of these different things. Yeah. But we visited some of our development projects over there. And then also, obviously, since we sponsor orphans, we visited some of our orphan families, particularly the ones that we visited were the ones that were benefiting from our complementary funds. Okay. So they received sponsorship funds, but then also some sort of emergency of theirs was supported through the complementary fund. Okay. And the three families that we visited, all three of them actually had medical emergencies that the complementary funds kind of supported to alleviate. So of the three families we visited, two of them were at our old price points of sponsorship, and one of them were at a new price point. Mm-hmm. That's a whole thing I can get into.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yes, no. Tell us about that. What does that mean? And did you see a difference based on that price difference of care and of relief for those families?
Yeah, absolutely. So since we've started this program, we had about like a 3-tier system of sponsorship where different countries, based on the need and just the cost of living in those countries, had different price points of sponsorship. Right. And those price points looked like for $3, $65, $35. And like since 20 years ago, we never updated those price points.
This is per month, correct? We're saying $43 a month.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So as you can imagine, that price point in this day and age with the cost of living now, it really gets you nowhere. Yeah. So we've had an initiative in the past year or two where we're trying to upgrade, and all the family members in our Islamic Relief family have been upgrading the price points of sponsorship. And now we're at $100. And after sort of the admin cuts, the orphan family receives $80. Mm-hmm. So we visited one family that was receiving $100. Two of the families were receiving the old price point. So that's about like $33 a month, something very low. They also receive the funds once a quarter. And so they receive it for 3 months at a time. Okay. And then you saw from the presentation and some of the pictures that I shared that just the living conditions are really difficult. Like most of them are in rented houses. They have no furniture. Yeah. It's one room, maybe a small kitchen. It's just carpets. And the biggest thing is that when an orphan is sponsored, it's not just the orphan that's benefiting, it's the entire family. Yeah. So in every one of those families, there was multiple siblings. It was usually the siblings that had some sort of a medical issue. The mother always had a medical issue. There were conditions where, the mother had a thyroid issue and she had diabetes, and like she had necessarily like had to have medication every day, and she didn't have access to those medication. The one that really stuck with me was actually one of our beneficiaries that was receiving the $100 price point, but he was the youngest in the family. His name is Sahad. He had 4 older siblings. His mom had a thyroid issue. She had diabetes as well. She had medication that like she couldn't get access to. None of his older siblings were bringing in income because they were all enrolled in education. And the majority of the money that they were receiving was going to the mother's health issues. And the other expenses they had, all of these families were in debt to the grocery store. They were in debt to the government because they weren't being able to pay their bills. So we're not only talking about like paying rent with that money, but we're paying, they're paying their debt. They're trying to pay for school stuff, all of these stuff.
Wow.
So the one expense that he had that he would benefit from after all of these other expenses were paid was his transportation to school. And his school was, so I asked how far school was, and it was a 35-minute drive.
Wow.
And his monthly transportation cost 60,000 dirham, which is about $40 in USD. And he was saying that some months they were able to pay, some months it would be that they paid maybe 40,000 dirhams, and then the rest of the days he would walk.
Wow.
And so when you think about like a 35-minute car drive, he's having to walk like some of the days of the month just to go get an education because the money is being utilized for these other much more like emergent expenses.
Right. Yeah. Food and medicine. And it dawned on me, when a donor gives money to an orphan, is there a way to say, I would like to make sure that the entire family is sponsored? If there's 4 siblings, I would like all 4 in that families to feel like you're making a bigger impact, or as a donor, do we not have that kind of choice?
So we did actually have an initiative that we tried once before. It was called Family Sponsorship. And it just didn't take off.
That's interesting.
The way that we would hope. There were a couple of families that were being sponsored, where like 4 orphans were being sponsored at once.
Yeah.
And you think it would work because we have many donors that will sponsor 10 orphans at once.
Right.
And so if that is the case and all the children in the family are eligible, we will do that. Just not systemize it in that way.
Yeah.
But for example, Dinaz was one of the first children that I presented on. She was 10 years old. Her older sister had IBS, like severe IBS and health issues and needed medication and stuff. But she was over 20, so she wasn't eligible for sponsorship. She also wasn't enrolled in education. And that's a big, like, important thing in our criteria because we want to make sure that they have educational opportunities, that they are, because you'll see a lot of instances in some of the countries that we work in where the parents don't support girls' education.
Right.
And we want to make sure that it is supported. And so it's sort of an initiative for them of like, if you want to receive sponsorship, if you want to benefit from them, enroll your girls in education.
But they have to be younger than 18.
Yeah.
Okay.
We did have sponsorship of orphans between 18 to 24 previously. And I do think that there's a huge case for why that should be done because that's really when they're in higher education.
Right.
And we had, you remember Zara Adalat who came and visited us from Pakistan, and she said in her speech of like, if you stop sponsorship when we get to higher education, it's like,
pulling the plug on livelihood. Yeah. It's
planted a seed, and before it can grow into a plant, you cut it off. That was the metaphor that she had used.
Wow.
But just in the circumstances that we're in right now, one, because of our price change and our upgrade, we have lost a lot of sponsorships because it's difficult for people to sponsor at $100. That's a major challenge that we're dealing with. And in those cases, we have to prioritize our younger orphans and the ones that, are going to be sponsored for a long period of time. We still do have some that are being sponsored at 18 plus, but we've been, just checking whether or not they're eligible, if there's any special circumstances, but really ending those sponsorships and re-signing those donors to new orphans. And then inshallah, we hope to, and it is my goal to have like other separate programming where people can specifically donate for education and health medical issues.
So years ago, I remember when we before I joined Islamic Relief and we were sponsoring an orphan, I believe we got like a profile of the orphan with a picture, and sometimes we even got like a handwritten note. Does that still happen?
Yeah, so we do that. When you sponsor an orphan, the first thing is you get a sort of like biodata.
Okay.
And then every year we do an annual progress report. So as you can imagine, that's part of one of the challenges
Yeah.
we've had up to 29,000 orphans at one point.
Wow.
So to get a yearly progress report for every single one of them, we fall behind sometimes. That is the goal of getting everyone a report. And then donors can communicate with their orphans, the orphans that they sponsor within ethical guidelines. So they often send notes.
Wow.
Orphans will write back if they choose to. There's no obligation, honestly.
That's amazing. I have to ask my husband because I know we're sponsoring, I think 3 or 4, and I don't check the mail, but he does. So I'm going to need to ask him about that.
Donors can also always request one and we'll expedite it.
Oh, that's amazing. You started talking a little bit about the challenges, and there's a multitude of them. But I think one of the things that, we really don't think about is the emotional weight of doing this kind of work, especially when you're dealing with these heartbreaking situations. How do you deal with that?
I think one perspective, right? So I think doing my first field visit, going into the homes of these people, and the last question we asked them, a part of our process is to verify that they're receiving the money properly, that they're being treated properly, that their needs are being met, all of these things.
Yeah.
And then the last thing we ask them is there anything more that you want to share?
Yeah.
And of course, they tell you how much more need they have. They have a refrigerator that's not working and they've been complaining about that for months and they're hoping for more money. They also think that because you've come from America and you're visiting them, they're going to get a little bit of special treatment or they're going to receive more money.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can't do that because it's on that air.
Oh, yeah.
And also, we visited one home in a neighborhood. As we were leaving, there was another orphan beneficiary a couple homes down the street who called and said, why didn't they visit us? Oh,
Tough, yeah.
And so the word also travels so quickly that if we did give somebody a little bit extra, that would be so unfair to the other thousands of orphans that we're sponsoring in that area.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult to hear that and then be like, well, thank you, and walk away.
Right.
And I was, that day was like really difficult for me.
Yeah.
And that feels kind of ridiculous to say because I get to leave.
Yeah.
We're not even in that situation,
Right.
But even just, and I mentioned this in my presentation at All Hands too, of like, what difference does a $40 a month make to somebody who's walking to school? And the difference of whether or not he can go to school, And for us, $40 is lunch.
Yeah.
We don't even think about it.
Yeah.
And so it really like puts into perspective of like, what are we doing with our money, which is an amana, These people have a right to our money, to our funds, to all of the privileges that we have. But subhanAllah, the very next day, the project that we visited was a development project in a town called Halabja in the south of the Kurdistan region. And seeing the impact of that project and the people that were involved in that project and just how passionate, like it was fully the community. Everybody was from the community.
Yeah.
Everybody was super passionate. They just wanted to rebuild their community and they're like, nothing was going to stop them.
Amazing.
And so to see that level of like impact on the work that we were doing and to see those kind of people gathering for themselves, for each other, for their home, for their community, that really just like balanced the whole thing for me. And I was like, subhanAllah, there is so much hope.
There is, SubhanAllah, we can't live without that hope. What are some misconceptions about orphans that people should know about?
I think misconceptions in our work include some of the stuff about orphanages. We get a lot of questions about how the money is being utilized, why we've upgraded the price point so drastically, why it's higher than a lot of other organizations. There's organizations out there that you can sponsor an orphan for $40, and I think it's important for us as practitioners and people who do this work and also for donors whose money is going to orphans, which is the most important thing, to think about, our intentions. And are we doing this just to check a box and say, hey, we helped an orphan.
Yeah.
I'm going to get that ajr. But really think about what $40 a month is going to do. And that's you're not even thinking about the administrative fees the organization is taking. How much is actually getting to the family?
Yeah.
How much would you want to give your kids?
SubhanAllah.
So like we don't want to fire a lot of money, but $100 where our goal here is to lift them out of poverty, not sustain them in it.
Yeah. Oh.
And you can see from like the families we visited how difficult that is. Even at $100 a month, they're struggling so much. The need is so great. And so we have all these other projects that we hope to help. We do food boxes. The families benefit from those seasonally. We do school supplies. And so those were all, every house we visited, they said, we want more food boxes. We want more school supplies, because that's something we do once a year. Then we'll do Qurbani, we'll do Ramadan, and like they rotate which families benefit since there's so many orphan families.
Yeah.
But again, we're not sort of just trying to like give emergency aid. We want to build them up to be able to sustain themselves, right? So we're doing these livelihood trainings. We do it like helping people start businesses, having like the parents be involved in like pooling money together, or be involved in projects, be beneficiaries of other projects where they are learning these sort of like hard skills that they can start their own small businesses and stuff like that.
So you're saying the misconception is that orphans are just sitting there, just getting money, eating, whatever. But no, they're actually living a full life that requires full wraparound services. And you just said something that kind of hurt my heart. But if you, God forbid, were to pass and you are leaving behind your own orphan children, how would you want them to live? And on that note, to our viewers, we're going to quickly take a break to show you a video around our orphan program. Take a minute to watch and we'll be right back.
Every child deserves love, safety, and a future. But for millions of orphans around the world, childhood is filled with silence, loss, and uncertainty. They didn't choose this path. They didn't ask to be alone. Some endure days without food to fill their stomachs, others without words to comfort their hearts. But you can change their story.
اسمي عواد الأحمد، مولد 2001، مريض ثلاسيميا. كل شهر أروح بتعالج مشفى شتورة. كلف العلاج $150. أحياناً بتأخر، أنا بتأخر عن الموعد عن العلاج، أتعب يعني. أحياناً أمرض ما فيني أروح، وديما صار الدين أروح أتعالج. يعني كانت في جمعية تساعدنا بالكورونا، وقفت الجمعية عن المريضين الثلاسيميا كلهم، يعني مو بس عني لحالي. كانت تعالجني وتعطيني دواء. هلا دواء حديد $500، وما منه بلبنان كله أبداً، مفقود خالص. ما عم نشرب دواء الحديد.
With Islamic Relief USA, we can give them more than survival. We can give them hope. They've lost everything, but they haven't lost the chance to be loved again. Nourish the soul, serve the world.
Thank you so much for viewing that, and welcome back to What a Relief. We are again speaking about our Orphans program here at Islamic Relief. This has been one of the most emotional, I think, conversations that I've had in a very long time, because it's really talking about the most vulnerable. And Dua, you mentioned that when we first started, that this is talking about the most vulnerable communities that we support at Islamic Relief. And that means it's going to take a lot more than just a simple donation. It's actually a community effort. So let's talk about that a little bit. Talk about the communities that support these programs, both locally there where the orphans living, but also here domestically in the United States, what we can do.
Yeah. So when you think locally, it really is, like you said earlier, like it takes a village. It's such a team effort. There's so many projects that we do that are focused on community building. So many that like are involved with child protection, and they rely on the community members to create those spaces. Not to mention the staff that work in those field offices, they're all local. In Iraq, we saw there were some people that had graduated from the Orphan program. That were then the staff that went and visited. There's the same case in Pakistan. One of the, I heard this was before my time, but one of the orphans that graduated from the program that came and visited us and went on our Pakistan dinners.
Yeah.
She was working for the Islamic Relief Pakistan office.
SubhanAllah.
You know, wow. It is like, in that sense, on the ground, it very much is community. And as I was thinking about this podcast, I was thinking about like how many people are involved in getting an orphan the care that they need, right?
Yeah.
So to me, the biggest thing, or the way that I look at my work in this program, is that it's an amana, right?
Yeah.
We are in a position of privilege where we get to help orphans. Ultimately, Allah is the only source of all things, right? We're not doing anyone any favors here.
Yeah.
Allah is going to take care of those orphans, whether or not we're involved.
Yeah.
We have the privilege of being middlemen here, of managing this program, everybody on my team, our executives who make decisions, our CEOs, the country directors of field offices, and most importantly, the donors whose money is going to the orphans. And I think for all of us, if we look at us as a community and how many people are involved in just getting one orphan the care that they deserve, that Allah was going to give them anyway, but He's given so many of us the privilege of being in that pipeline of providing that care. SubhanAllah, like that's something thing for good.
No. Oh my God, that's amazing. I almost want to end it here because it's so perfect. But actually, let's talk a little bit more about that. Let's ask about this call to action. So, what keeps you motivated in the face of such heavy and complex challenges? And when you think about that, how can we get our listeners involved more so in doing this work?
Yeah, I think to answer the first part of that question, I would just repeat what I just said, of this sense of like it's responsibility, it's our duty. And not only is it a privilege, but we're all going to stand in front of Allah on the Day of Judgment and answer, did we do our very best to the full capacity that we can and with all the resources that we have to do the job that Allah gave us to do? Because whether or not your career is humanitarian aid,
Right.
we have a responsibility to serve. Whether you're an engineer or an artist or a housewife, it's our responsibility to make this world a better place and to serve other people.
Yeah.
So what resources do you have that you can do that with? I ask myself every day in this position, did I push myself to my fullest extent that I can like stand in front of Allah and say, I cried? Because we're never going to be able to do enough.
Right.
There are always going to be people that are in extreme poverty. There's going to be orphans that are not sponsored. And that's a big challenge we're seeing now with this price change of like our pool of unsponsored orphan keeps growing.
Oh, yeah.
And so every day, like when that can feel defeating, that's a question I ask myself. Did I do everything? Did I push everyone around me to their full capacity? And I think that's the question that everybody should ask themselves of like, with all the resources I have, because you're working for people that don't have resources. That's the biggest thing, right? Because we can make a lot with opportunity, but when you don't have opportunities,
Yeah.
you know, as we have so much, we have money, we have resources, we have privilege, we have like where we live, all of these things. So did you use everything you have to try to help somebody else, to help these orphans, to help the people that have a right to your resources, right?
Yeah.
Because in Islam, your money is not yours.
No.
It's an amana given by Allah. You fulfill your needs, you fulfill your family's needs, and the poor have a right to your money. And I think we've lost that sentiment. And it really, like, going into the field reminds you of like how, like, just that $40 I keep coming back to, like, how quickly and without thinking do I spend $40? And that's $40 that somebody else has a right to. And that $40 for them could go way further than it goes for me.
Than a simple like meal out or a brunch out.
Yeah.
I think that this has been the most amazing conversation. We had a fundraising manager in the Northeast who's no longer with us at IR, but she would always say, if you're not cool with the orphans, you're not cool with me. And it's true, like everything that you were saying, like if we're not going back and thinking about our responsibility to the most vulnerable communities abroad, here, everywhere, what are we doing? What are we doing? So thank you so much, Da. I really appreciate you coming and really being vulnerable with us and telling us everything. And hopefully to our audience, you took something useful out of this today and understanding your responsibility and your role in the life that you could lead both here and what you could do for a life somewhere else as well. I hope you take that opportunity. As always, we'll link at the bottom where you can sponsor an orphan. I hope you take the opportunity to do that today, especially after hearing this conversation. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. We really appreciate everything that you do and for supporting Islamic Relief in all of our orphan care. Hopefully you had a wonderful Eid, and we will see you at our next Water Relief. Assalamu alaikum.